In the 1980s, one word terrified the drug lords of Colombia more than any other: extradition. Being dragged to a U.S. prison was a life sentence without parole. To avoid it, Pablo Escobar declared war. But his partners, the sophisticated Ochoa brothers, built a better path, a legal fortress. Their solution wasn't violence, it was a secret meeting, a negotiation with the government that offered complete immunity from U.S. justice in exchange for their surrender. For Fabio Ochoa, the youngest and smartest of the three, this deal saved his life and secured his fortune. But the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, doesn't forget. And they spent the next decade hunting for one single loophole to break the deal. This is the story of the one secret agreement that nearly worked, and how the DEA successfully bypassed it. By 1990, the Medellin Cartel was fractured. Pablo Escobar was on the run, cornered by his own endless violence. The Ochoa brothers, masters of the logistical side of the business, saw the writing on the wall. They had the money, they had the horses, but they didn't have peace. Their older brother, Jorge Luis, was indicted in the U.S. for the murder of a DEA informant, Barry Seal. The threat of extradition was existential, but in Colombia, the president, Cesar Gaviria, was desperate to end the war. The resulting agreement was known as Sumisión a la Justicia, submission to justice. This was the DEA's nightmare. The terms were simple: surrender, confess your existing crimes, and you will serve your time in a Colombian prison. Crucially, in return, the government promised that you would never be extradited to the United States. The Ochoas were first in line. On December 7, 1990, Fabio Ochoa Vásquez, the chief executive of the family's empire, surrendered to authorities. He served less than 6 years. He walked free in 1996. The deal saved his life. He was officially a free man, protected by the Colombian Constitution. The DEA lost, or so they thought. For Juan David and Jorge Luis Ochoa, the deal worked perfectly. They were free, retired to their ranches, their fortunes mostly untouched. But Fabio, the youngest, couldn't stop. He allegedly returned to his old ways, dipping his toes back into the new flow of cocaine. The quiet life on the ranch was a gilded cage for a man who had once been the strategic mind behind a billion-dollar enterprise. While his brothers, Jorge Luis and Juan David, genuinely embraced retirement and the safety of their deal, Fabio felt restless. The market, far from collapsing after Escobar's death, had simply reorganized. New, leaner organizations, often referred to as baby cartels, were emerging, eager for the institutional knowledge that only an Ochoa possessed. The lure of easy, clean profit, coupled with the profound arrogance that comes from beating the U.S. government once, proved too strong. He saw himself not as a trafficker, but as a silent, untouchable consultant. A maestro lending his expertise to the next generation of smugglers. The new flow of drugs, often routed through Mexico and aimed straight at American cities, offered a perfect, low-profile entry point. This calculated risk, based on the assumption that his 1991 pardon made him bulletproof, became the crack in the legal armor the DEA had spent nearly a decade trying to find. This gave the DEA the precise legal loophole they needed. The 1991 deal guaranteed immunity for all crimes committed before 1991. Any new activity was fair game. In 1999, the DEA launched Operation Millennium, a massive indictment targeting a new global smuggling network. Fabio Ochoa's name was on the list. The U.S. prosecutors argued that Fabio wasn't a retired cartel boss. He was an active consultant, leveraging his old networks for a cut of the new business. They had evidence of wiretapped conversations. This was the new crime the U.S. needed. Meanwhile, a shadowy figure emerged in Fabio's defense. A DEA informant named Baruch Vega. Vega ran a bizarre, unofficial program called the Rehabilitation Program of Narcotics Traffickers. Ochoa later alleged that his own lawyer, in collusion with another defendant, tried to convince him to pay a $30 million bribe or kickback to get a phantom cooperation deal with the U.S. Ochoa refused the bribe and refused to cooperate with the U.S. on principle. He held on to the core belief of his initial deal. He was innocent of this new crime, and he would not be extradited. He printed pamphlets that read, "Soy inocente," I am innocent. This was a fatal mistake. Fabio Ochoa had relied on a promise made by one Colombian government, but the political winds had changed. Extradition was reinstated in 1997. The U.S. government put intense, sustained pressure on Bogotá. In September 2001, Fabio Ochoa Vásquez was handed over to the U.S. Marshals and extradited to the United States. The extradition shield, the very deal that had saved him from a war with Escobar and secured his brother's freedom, was shattered for him. He was the only one of the 40-plus defendants in Operation Millennium who refused to plead guilty. Why? Because pleading guilty would have validated the U.S. argument that his original 1991 deal was worthless. He went to trial, was found guilty, and was sentenced to 30 years in a U.S. federal prison. The DEA finally won, but the victory came with a caveat. Because of the previous Colombian deal, the U.S. prosecution was barred from introducing evidence of any crime committed before 1997, meaning they could not charge him with the Berry Seal murder nor any of the original cartel's bloodshed. Fabio Ochoa served 30 years for the relatively smaller crime of conspiring to traffic cocaine in the late 1990s. After 25 years in prison, Fabio Ochoa, now 67, was deported to Colombia in late 2024. He was met at the airport by family and a swarm of journalists. His statement: "He was framed, and the nightmare is over." The DEA and U.S. prosecutors may have won the battle for extradition and conviction, but they arguably lost the financial war. Richard Gregory, the prosecutor on the case, openly stated that authorities were never able to seize all of the Ochoa family's illicit drug proceeds. Fabio Ochoa is now a free man in Colombia with no active warrants. He may have spent 2 decades in prison, a price the 2 other brothers avoided, but the DEA agent who put him away estimates Fabio won't be retiring a poor man. The secret deal of 1991 ultimately failed Fabio, but it bought his entire family enough time to secure the one thing the DEA could never touch: the family fortune. Let me know what you think. Did the U.S. win, or did the Ochoa family ultimately use the legal system to achieve their goal of financial and familial survival? Drop a comment below, and if you want the full breakdown of how the Cali cartel used a different, even more successful legal strategy, click the video on screen now.